the last words. The village of Blythewood lay nestled between hills, its cobblestone streets winding like ancient veins through a landscape that seemed untouched by time. It was the kind of village where every face was familiar and every door led to another story. Peaceful, quiet, and wrapped in a comforting blanket of pastoral serenity, it hardly seemed the place for murder. But then, Blythewood had its secrets, just like any other place. And secrets, as Miss Marple often remarked, had a way of coming to the surface when least expected. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon when Lily Harper, a quiet, observant girl of 15, unwittingly became the centre of a mystery that would send ripples through the village's calm surface. Lily had always been the type to wander, to observe without being noticed. Her parents, kind but distant, often found her lost in thought, her large brown eyes staring at the world through a lens that no one else seemed to share. On that particular afternoon, she had taken her usual route through the village, a narrow path that ran along the edge of the old Grey estate. Mr. Theodore Grey, a reclusive bachelor, had lived in the grand house at the top of the hill for as long as anyone could remember. Tall, dark, and looming, the house had always been an object of curiosity for the village children, who whispered tales of its mysterious inhabitant. Mr. Grey rarely ventured out, and when he did, it was only for brief excursions into the village for supplies, always with his head down, his eyes averted. Lily had seen him only once or twice, but she had heard the gossip about his immense fortune, his solitary existence, and the air of secrecy that surrounded him. His house was as much a symbol of his mystery as the man himself. And yet, that day, there was nothing unusual in the air as Lily strolled along the path. The sun was beginning its descent behind the hills, casting long shadows over the fields, and the cool autumn breeze carried the scent of wood smoke and damp earth. It was at that moment, just as she passed the iron gate of the Grey estate, that she heard the sound. A faint gasping breath, followed by a soft murmur. The words, though barely audible, seemed to float through the air, beckoning her. Lily paused, her heart quickening in her chest. It was as though something unseen had pulled her to the gate. With cautious steps she approached, her curiosity piqued. She peered through the bars of the gate and into the garden beyond. Mr. Grey's study window was open, the curtains fluttering gently in the wind. There, in the dim light of the room, she saw him, Mr. Theodore Grey, slumped over his desk, his head resting on his arms. A bottle of what looked like brandy stood beside him, half empty. He was alone, his pale face hidden in shadow. But it was the words that lingered in the air, the last words that would haunt Lily for days to come. She strained her ears, trying to make sense of the fragmented sentence. The words came in fits and starts, broken and disjointed, as if he were speaking to someone only he could see. Not her, not... it wasn't... The voice trailed off, and there was silence, the kind of silence that presses down on your chest, suffocating, oppressive. Lily stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Her mind raced. Was he hurt? Should she go inside? Should she call for help? But before she could make a decision, she heard a faint creak from the door of the study. She stepped back just in time to see a figure enter the room, a tall man in a dark coat. The figure paused at the threshold, glancing toward the desk where Mr. Grey remained still. Lily's heart skipped a beat. She knew something was wrong. The man's presence was too sudden, too silent, as if he'd been waiting for the perfect moment to make his move. For a second, their eyes met through the window, a fleeting glance, but it was enough to send a chill down Lily's spine. She turned on her heel and fled down the path, her legs trembling, her mind reeling. That night, as she lay in bed, the image of Mr. Grey's lifeless body haunted her thoughts. She couldn't shake the sound of his last words, those broken fragments that seemed to hold a deeper meaning. She had heard something important, but she couldn't put it all together. Who had he been speaking to, and what had he meant by "not her"? The next morning, word spread quickly through Blythewood. Mr. Grey had been found dead in his study, his body cold and lifeless, just as Lily had seen it the day before. The doctor had ruled it heart failure, a natural death, but something about the scene didn't sit right. His posture, slumped over as though he had been caught off guard, was too odd too, deliberate. There was no sign of struggle, no indication of foul play. But the villagers whispered, and in the midst of it all Miss Marple arrived in Blithwood. The elderly detective, known for her keen observations and sharp wit, had been staying at the local inn for a visit. She had heard the gossip, of course, but she didn't rush to judgment. As she often said, there was no such thing as an unsolvable mystery, just pieces that needed to be carefully examined. Lily Harper was about to become a key player in a case that none of them could have anticipated. What Lily had overheard, the fragments of words spoken by a dying man, held the key to a truth that had been hidden in the shadows of Blithwood for years, and Miss Marple, with her characteristic patience and insight, was determined to find it. But would she be able to unravel the tangled web before it was too late? Only time would tell. The sun hung low in the sky, casting its warm golden light over Blithwood, but there was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the autumn breeze, the death of Mr. Theodore Gray had left the village in a state of uneasy quiet. People went about their business, but their eyes often strayed to the imposing Gray estate, as if expecting it to reveal some new, unsettling truth. Lily Harper, the young girl who had overheard the last words of the deceased, had been questioned by the police, but she didn't feel quite as though she had been a part of the investigation. She had merely been a witness, after all. But something inside her stirred, a feeling she couldn't quite shake. She had heard something important, and though the words were scattered and incomplete, they had been enough to unsettle her. The strange sense that there was more to Mr. Gray's death than met the eye grew with each passing hour. Miss Marple had arrived in Blithwood the day after the death. She had been staying at the village inn for the past week, but it was clear from the moment she set foot in the village that she had already been keeping a close eye on the goings-on. She had heard the whispers, the rumours circulating among the villagers, and as usual she wasn't one to overlook the small details others might miss. The first time Lily saw Miss Marple was at the post office. The old woman was standing at the counter exchanging a few words with Mrs. Trotter, the postmistress, who was clearly eager to offer her opinion on the recent tragedy. Lily had just entered to collect a letter when she overheard the conversation. "I don't believe it for a moment," Mrs. Trotter was saying. "Heart failure, they say. Nonsense. Theodore Gray was a healthy man as far as anyone could tell. There must have been foul play involved. Or something odd. I've heard talk that someone's been seen sneaking around his place for days before it happened." Miss Marple, who had been quietly listening, leaned in, her gentle eyes narrowing slightly as she spoke. "A healthy man, you say? People often overlook the smallest of details in such matters. It is in those details that the truth often lies." Lily couldn't help but feel a spark of curiosity. She had heard the gossip too, the rumours about Mr. Gray's reclusive lifestyle, his odd habits, and the strange atmosphere that had surrounded his house. But what caught her attention was Miss Marple's composed, almost serene manner. There was something about the old woman that seemed to suggest she was not just listening to the words, but also to the silences between them. That afternoon, as Lily made her way back through the village, she saw Miss Marple once more, this time standing in front of the Gray estate. The gate was closed, and the ivy that clung to the stone walls seemed to hide the house from view, but Miss Marple stood still, studying it with an intensity that felt both calm and calculating. Lily slowed her steps as she watched the elderly woman, who, despite her age, carried herself with a kind of quiet authority. "Miss Marple," Lily called out, her voice soft but firm. The old detective turned her head, her warm smile immediately putting Lily at ease. "Ah, Miss Harper, I do hope you're doing well." Lily hesitated, unsure of what to say. She hadn't been able to shake the feeling that something was off about Mr. Gray's death, and now that Miss Marple had arrived, it felt like her instinct was right. I overheard something the day Mr. Gray died," she confessed. "His last words, they didn't make any sense to me, but I think they might mean something." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with interest. "What were these words, my dear?" Lily swallowed, her throat dry. She repeated the broken fragments she'd heard the day before. "Not her. It wasn't." She paused, trying to piece them together in her mind. "I don't know. It was like he was talking to someone, but there was no one there." Miss Marple listened intently, her gaze never wavering from Lily's face. "Very curious," she murmured. "And you're certain no one else was in the room with Mr. Gray?" Lily nodded, remembering the stillness of the scene, the emptiness of the study. I'm sure there was only him and the words, but it wasn't just the words that disturbed me, it was the way he said them. It was like he was trying to warn someone, or maybe confess something. Miss Marple considered this for a moment, her mind already racing through the possibilities. I see, she said softly. You have a very sharp ear, Miss Harper. The first clue often lies in the most overlooked things, the things others don't pay attention to. Lily felt a sense of unease settle in her stomach. She couldn't explain why, but Miss Marple's words had a weight to them, as if the old woman had already begun to see things that others hadn't. I'd like to hear more of your observations, Miss Harper, Miss Marple said, her tone turning more serious. Would you be willing to help me with something? Lily hesitated. She wasn't sure what help she could offer, but the thought of having Miss Marple's guidance in solving the mystery filled her with a sense of purpose. Of course, she said finally. Good, Miss Marple replied, her eyes softening again. I believe you've already done more than you know, my dear. Sometimes all it takes is a keen ear to reveal what others are too distracted to hear. With that, Miss Marple turned and walked toward the gate of the grey estate, her steps deliberate and calm. Lily followed at a distance, wondering just how much the elderly detective already knew. It was clear that she was not just interested in Mr. Grey's death. No, Miss Marple was interested in the truth, and Lily had a feeling that, with her help, the pieces of the puzzle might soon fall into place. But there were more questions than answers. What had Mr. Grey been trying to say with his last words, and why had Lily overheard them? As the mystery deepened, Lily's role in it would become clearer, and Miss Marple's investigation would soon reveal secrets about Blythewood and its inhabitants that no one had ever suspected. The grey estate, with its ivy-clad walls and towering windows, loomed like a dark sentinel at the edge of the village. For years it had been a subject of gossip, speculation and intrigue. Those who had lived in Blythewood for generations had grown accustomed to the silence of Mr. Theodore Grey, who rarely mingled with the villagers. But now the estate had become something far more significant. A puzzle, with its own set of mysteries, waiting to be uncovered. Miss Marple, with her quiet wisdom, had always known that it was the most peculiar places that hid the most profound truths. And it wasn't long before she'd gathered enough pieces to understand that the Grey estate was more than just a mansion. It was a fortress of secrets, each room filled with the echoes of lives lived and lost. After her conversation with Lily, Miss Marple had decided it was time to visit the house. The police had already conducted their preliminary investigation, and the official verdict had been heart failure. But Miss Marple wasn't convinced. She believed there was more to Mr. Grey's death than a simple medical condition. By the time Lily returned home that evening, Miss Marple had already made her way to the Grey estate. She had entered through the side gate, which was slightly ajar as if inviting her in. Lily, who had been watching from her window, felt a tug of curiosity and decided to follow at a distance. She had not yet shared all the details of what she had overheard, and the idea of being near Miss Marple while she conducted her investigation made Lily feel like she might finally find the answers she had been searching for. As Lily approached the estate, she noticed that the door to the study was wide open, just as it had been the day before. The room appeared untouched, but there was an eerie stillness that seemed to hang in the air. The air inside the study was thick with the scent of tobacco smoke, old leather, and something faintly sweet, perhaps the remnants of a flower arrangement that had long since wilted. Miss Marple was standing near the desk, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. Her sharp eyes were scanning the room methodically, noting the small details that others might have missed. There were no signs of a struggle, no signs of forced entry. But the stillness of the room, the quiet perfection in its disarray, suggested that something had been amiss. "I'm glad you could join me, Miss Harper," Miss Marple said without turning around. "I thought you might like to see the place where Mr. Grey spent so much of his time." Lily stepped into the room, her heart pounding. "It looks normal," she said hesitantly. "But it's not, is it?" Miss Marple glanced at her with a gentle smile. "Not everything is as it seems, my dear. That's the first lesson any good detective learns." The old detective moved toward the desk, her gaze fixed on a piece of paper that had been left carelessly beside a half-empty brandy bottle. It was a letter, hastily written, the ink smudged in places as though the writer had been in a hurry. Lily peered over Miss Marple's shoulder. "What does it say?" Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. Instead, she picked up the letter with a delicate touch, turning it over in her hands. The handwriting was elegant but shaky, the words seeming to spill out in a rush. "To my dear friend," it began, but the rest of the text was illegible. The ink had smeared at the edges, making it almost impossible to read the contents. Still, there was something about the letter that struck Lily as odd. It was as though someone had tried to hide the contents, as if it had been written in secret, a desperate attempt to convey something important. "Perhaps," Miss Marple murmured, "this is the message that Mr. Gray was trying to send before he passed." Lily felt a chill run through her as she watched Miss Marple set the letter back down on the desk. "You think this letter is important?" "I do," Miss Marple replied quietly. "I believe it holds the key to understanding what happened here." Lily nodded, though she felt a sense of unease settle in her chest. There was something off about the whole situation, something that felt wrong, like a shadow that followed them through the study. As Miss Marple examined the desk, her eyes paused on a small ornate clock sitting in the corner. It was a simple piece, but it seemed to draw her attention. With a sharp click, she opened the glass casing, revealing the inner workings of the clock. It wasn't the time that caught her attention, but the small compartment behind the clock face, a hidden drawer. Lily watched wide-eyed as Miss Marple carefully opened the drawer, revealing a stack of photographs. They were old, their edges frayed, some faded with time. Miss Marple flipped through them slowly, her eyes narrowing with interest. "These are curious," she said softly. "Very curious indeed." Lily stepped closer, her curiosity piqued. The photographs were of Mr. Gray, but not in the way she had seen him before. In these, he was not the solitary reclusive figure of the village, but a man surrounded by people, smiling, laughing, even dancing. There were images of him with a woman Lily didn't recognize, smiling warmly at him, her arm draped over his shoulder. The woman appeared in several photos, each time closer to Mr. Gray, her face beaming with affection. "Who is she?" Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I believe," Miss Marple said, "this is the woman Mr. Gray was speaking of in his final moments, the woman whose name he refused to speak." The realization struck Lily like a bolt of lightning. The cryptic words she had overheard, "Not her, not... it wasn't," suddenly made sense. Mr. Gray had been trying to say something about the woman in the photograph. But what? And why had his last words been so broken, so desperate? Miss Marple closed the drawer and turned to Lily, her expression unreadable. "The story is far from over, my dear. I believe we are only scratching the surface." Lily felt a knot form in her stomach. There was so much more to this story than she had ever imagined, and she wasn't sure she was ready for the answers. But Miss Marple seemed unbothered by the uncertainty, as if she had known all along that the truth would reveal itself when the time was right. "Shall we take a closer look at this woman?" Miss Marple asked, her voice soft but determined. Lily nodded, feeling a strange mix of excitement and fear. The mystery of Theodore Gray's death was deepening with every moment, and now, with Miss Marple's guidance, it seemed that the pieces were beginning to fall into place. But there were still many questions to answer, and Lily was beginning to understand that the truth, however dark and twisted it might be, was not something that could be ignored for long. The rain had begun to fall in a steady, rhythmic patter, the kind of gentle drizzle that always seemed to make the world feel a little more distant, a little more secretive. Blythewood, with its cobblestone streets and narrow lanes, looked different in the rain, its edges softened, its contours blurred, as if the village were holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And perhaps it was. Lily and Miss Marple stood in the Gray estate's study, the photograph of the mysterious woman still fresh in their minds. The more they stared at it, the more questions arose. Who was she? What role had she played in Theodore Gray's life? And why had he spoken of her in his final fragmented words? "Miss Marple," Lily began, her voice barely above a whisper, "who do you think she is? This woman in the photograph. Do you think she had something to do with Mr. Gray's death?" Miss Marple, with her usual calm composure, set the photograph back down on the desk. "The truth is rarely straightforward, my dear," she said softly. but I believe we are looking at a key piece of the puzzle. This woman was someone significant in Mr. Gray's life, someone he either feared, loved, or both. Lily nodded, but her mind was racing. There was something so familiar about the woman's face, something that seemed to tug at the edges of her memory. She couldn't quite place it, but she knew that there was more to this woman than the photograph let on. And then, like a bolt from the blue, the thought struck her. Could it be possible that this woman was involved in his death? Miss Marple studied the photograph again, her fingers tapping lightly on the edge of the frame. That is a possibility, yes, but we must be cautious not to jump to conclusions. There are many layers to a mystery like this, and each layer must be peeled back carefully. With a soft sigh, Miss Marple stood up and turned toward the door. I believe it's time we visited the local records office. If this woman was truly significant in Mr. Gray's life, we may be able to find some trace of her in the village's history. Lily followed Miss Marple out of the study, her curiosity growing with each step. As they left the Gray estate behind, Lily's thoughts were a whirlwind of questions and possibilities. She knew Miss Marple was always right to trust her instincts, but there was still a sense of dread that clung to Lily's chest. What if they uncovered something that was better left unknown? What if this mystery led them down a darker path than they had imagined? The records office was a small, dusty room tucked away in the heart of Blythewood, with shelves crammed full of yellowed documents and faded maps. The air inside smelled of old paper and ink, and the dim light from a single window cast long shadows on the walls. As they stepped inside, Lily felt a sense of solemnity. There was something about old records, about the weight of history, that always made her feel small, as if the past were watching her, waiting for her to find what had been buried. Miss Marple approached the desk, where Mrs. Morland, the village clerk, sat hunched over a ledger. Mrs. Morland was a small, wiry woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanour. She looked up from her book as they entered and gave Miss Marple a brief nod of recognition. "Afternoon, Miss Marple," she said briskly. "What can I help you with today?" "I'm looking for records on the Gray family," Miss Marple replied, "particularly anything related to Theodore Gray, the bachelor who passed away recently. I believe there may be something about a woman who was close to him. Do you have any old marriage records or personal documents that might shed light on this?" Mrs. Morland's eyes flickered with curiosity, but she didn't ask any questions. She simply stood and walked over to a nearby filing cabinet, where she pulled out a set of dusty files. "The Gray family, you say? Well, they've been here a long time. I suppose there's something in here about Mr. Gray and his family, but I'll warn you, Miss Marple, not all of it will be pleasant." Miss Marple's lips curled into a small, knowing smile. "I'm not one to shy away from unpleasantness, Mrs. Morland." The clerk shuffled through the papers, pulling out a file labelled Theodore Gray Personal. She opened it carefully, revealing a series of letters, tax records and photographs, each item more faded than the last. She paused for a moment, flipping through the papers with surprising speed, before stopping on a particular sheet. "Here we go," she muttered, pulling out a letter that seemed to have been written in a hurried hand. The letter was addressed to Theodore Gray, but there was no return address. Miss Marple took it from her without a word and began to read it aloud. "My dearest Theodore, I cannot bear to leave you, but I must. You know as well as I that our time together is limited. The secrets we share are too dangerous to be allowed to go on any longer. I fear that if I stay, I will bring only misery to you and those you care for. I have made my decision, though I know it will break your heart." Miss Marple paused, her brow furrowing. "This is a letter of farewell. But there's no name, no sign of who wrote it, only the promise of a tragic end." Lily's heart began to pound. She had heard of letters like this before, messages of love, of longing, of betrayal. And yet, this one felt different. The tone was urgent, desperate. Whoever had written it had been running from something, or someone. "Mrs. Morland," Lily asked, her voice trembling, "do you know if there were any records of a woman who might have been involved with Mr. Gray, someone who might have left him under such circumstances?" Mrs. Morland shuffled through a few more papers, muttering under her breath. Finally, she came across a small, faded photograph that made Lily's breath catch in her throat. It was a photograph of the same woman from the picture at the Gray estate, only this time she was younger, her face filled with youthful hope. The woman was holding a child in her arms, a small baby with bright eyes and curly hair. "That's her," Miss Marple said softly, recognising the face at once. "This is the woman Mr. Grey spoke of, and I believe, Miss Harper, we are now beginning to understand the true nature of his secrets." Lily looked at the photograph, her mind racing. The woman had a child, and if the woman had been involved with Mr. Grey, then what had happened to her and to the child? Miss Marple folded the photograph carefully and placed it in the file. "I believe it's time we spoke with the villagers. There are still pieces of the puzzle missing, but we're getting closer, Miss Harper. I can feel it." Lily nodded, her pulse quickening. She knew they were close now, but she also understood that the truth, when it finally arrived, would not be easy to bear. It never was. The next morning, the village of Blythewood was drenched in mist, a soft fog that clung to the cobblestones and curled around the edges of the buildings like a living thing. The quiet that usually permeated the village seemed to have deepened, and even the birds seemed reluctant to sing. Lily found herself standing in front of the Grey estate once more, her mind swirling with questions. What had Miss Marple uncovered in the records office? And how did the woman in the photograph fit into the puzzle of Mr. Grey's life and death? Miss Marple had been in the village for only a few days, but already her quiet presence had begun to unravel the fabric of Blythewood's secrets. It was no surprise to Lily that the old detective had found a connection between Mr. Grey and the mysterious woman from the photograph. But now, as Lily stood at the edge of the Grey estate's garden, she felt a growing sense of urgency. They were so close to the truth, but someone was watching them. Miss Marple had suggested they visit a few of the older residents who might remember more about Mr. Grey's past, particularly those who had known him before he became the reclusive figure he was in his later years. Lily had agreed, though a nagging feeling in her chest told her that the answers they were seeking might not be as simple as they hoped. As they made their way through the village, the fog parted slightly, and Lily could see the familiar faces of the villagers, some of them offering a polite nod, others a curious glance, but none of them truly acknowledging the presence of the mystery that seemed to have descended upon them. It was as if they were all pretending nothing had changed, nothing had happened. The first stop was Mrs. Phelps' cottage, a small ivy-covered house tucked away near the village square. Mrs. Phelps was an elderly woman who had lived in Blythewood her entire life. She was known for her sharp memory and even sharper tongue. If anyone could remember something about Mr. Grey's past, it would be her. "Ah, Miss Marple," Mrs. Phelps greeted them at the door, her voice cracking with age. "I was wondering when you'd come knocking. I'd been expecting it. There's always something about death that draws you in, doesn't it?" Miss Marple smiled warmly, though there was a sharpness to her eyes that suggested she wasn't there simply for casual conversation. "Good morning, Mrs. Phelps. We're investigating the death of Theodore Grey. I understand you knew him once, many years ago. Perhaps you could help us with a few details." Mrs. Phelps studied them for a moment, her eyes flickering over Lily's face with something between curiosity and suspicion. "Ah, Theodore. Yes, I knew him well enough when he was younger. He wasn't always the strange, solitary man that everyone remembers. In fact, he had a bit of a different life back then. He had a woman in his life. Oh, yes, indeed. A woman who was very much a part of the village for a time. I never did understand what happened between them." Lily's heart quickened. "Do you know her name? The woman who was with him?" Mrs. Phelps's eyes grew cloudy, as if trying to summon the memory from the recesses of her mind. "Her name? I believe it was Eliza. Eliza Whittaker. Yes, that sounds right. She was lovely, you know. Always so graceful, so charming. They made quite the couple, Theodore and Eliza, but then, well, things changed." Miss Marple leaned forward, her interest piqued. "What kind of changes, Mrs. Phelps? Did something happen between them?" The old woman's face grew grim, and she looked over her shoulder as though making sure no one was listening. "Well, no one talked about it much at the time, but there was an incident, a tragic one. Eliza disappeared, vanished without a trace. Theodore was beside himself, of course. He searched for her, but no one could find her. Some said she ran off, others said something more sinister had happened, but in the end, all anyone knew for sure was that she was gone, and Theodore? Well, after that he became more reclusive, more distant. He rarely left the estate. And anyone who asked about Eliza was met with a sharp answer. He didn't like to talk about her. Lily felt a chill run down her spine. Eliza Whittaker. The name had been so close to the surface of her memory for days, and now it was clearer than ever. This was the woman Mr. Grey had been speaking about in his final moments, the woman whose name he had struggled to say. But if Eliza had disappeared, what had happened to her? And why had Mr. Grey never spoken of her? Miss Marple's voice broke through Lily's thoughts. Did anyone ever find out what happened to Eliza Whittaker? Was there any trace of her after she disappeared? Mrs. Phelps shook her head, a wistful look crossing her face. No one ever found a thing. It's as if she just vanished into thin air. Theodore? Well, I suppose he never truly recovered from losing her. He lived the rest of his life alone, always thinking about her, I imagine. Did you ever hear about her having a child? Miss Marple's question was direct, cutting to the heart of the matter. Mrs. Phelps paused, her brow furrowing. A child? No, I don't recall anything about that, but there were always rumours, weren't there? People said all sorts of things about Theodore and Eliza. Some said they were married, others said they weren't, and some even whispered that Eliza might have had a child before she disappeared, but, well, those are just rumours. Miss Marple exchanged a glance with Lily, a knowing look passing between them. The photograph, the woman in it, the child in her arms, it was all beginning to fit together, but there were still so many pieces missing. We appreciate your help, Mrs. Phelps, Miss Marple said, standing up and signalling for Lily to follow. You've given us much to think about. As they left the cottage and stepped back into the misty street, Lily couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the verge of something momentous. The woman who had been part of Mr. Grey's past, the child, everything pointed to a secret that had been buried for years. But what was it? What had happened to Eliza Whittaker, and how had she left such a lasting mark on Theodore Grey's life? Miss Marple walked slowly beside Lily, her thoughts clearly turning over the new information. The truth, Miss Harper, is never simple. But we are getting closer. I can feel it. Lily nodded, her mind racing. The mystery was deepening with every step, and she knew that whatever they uncovered, it would change the course of everything they thought they knew about Theodore Grey, the Grey estate, and the village of Blythewood itself. But the question lingered. What had happened to Eliza Whittaker? And what was the connection between her disappearance and Mr. Grey's final words? Only time and Miss Marple's patient investigation would tell. The fog had not lifted by the time Miss Marple and Lily made their way to the village cemetery. The air was thick with a damp chill, and the sound of their footsteps echoed eerily as they walked along the winding paths between the gravestones. Each marker seemed to stand as a silent witness to the passage of time, and yet there was something unsettling about the place today, as if it were hiding more than just the dead. Miss Marple had a particular reason for visiting the cemetery. She believed that if there was one place where the past might reveal its secrets, it was here, among the stones that held the stories of those long gone. Miss Marple, Lily said softly, glancing at the rows of graves, do you think we'll find anything here? It is often the quietest places that hold the loudest truths, my dear, Miss Marple replied, her voice steady but her eyes sharp with purpose. The truth once buried may be hard to unearth, but it is never completely lost. Lily nodded, though she still felt a sense of unease. They had learned much in the past few days about Theodore Grey and Eliza Whittaker, but there were still so many questions left unanswered. Eliza's disappearance had created a rift in Grey's life, a rift that had never healed, as Mrs. Phelps had so aptly described. But the one question that haunted Lily was whether Eliza had ever had a child. The photograph of the young woman holding a baby was a clue they couldn't ignore. They reached the older section of the cemetery, the part where the graves were more weathered, the inscriptions worn down by time. Miss Marple's keen eye darted over the stones, scanning the names. It wasn't long before she stopped at a particular grave, her eyes narrowing as she read the inscription. Here we are, Miss Marple said quietly, kneeling before the grave. Lily stepped closer, her heart beginning to race. The stone was weathered, the letters faint, but still legible. It read, Eliza Whittaker, beloved daughter and sister, 1982 to 1907. Lily's breath caught in her throat. The date of death, 1907. That was over a decade before Theodore Grey had become the reclusive man he was when Lily first saw him. but what truly struck her was the inscription: beloved daughter and sister, not a wife, not a partner, not the mother of a child. Miss Marple stood, her face thoughtful. Eliza Whittaker died young, far younger than anyone in the village had known. It seemed she was not just a woman of mystery, she was someone's daughter, someone's sister, but there is no mention of a child, no mention of any other relations. Lily's mind raced as she processed the words on the gravestone. Why hadn't anyone mentioned Eliza's family in all the stories they had heard? Was it possible that no one knew about her parents or siblings? Or had someone deliberately erased those connections, keeping Eliza's past hidden? I think it's time we spoke to someone who might have known Eliza before her disappearance, Miss Marple said, breaking into Lily's thoughts. We need to find out more about her family, her life before she and Theodore became involved. It's possible that someone in the village may still remember something that could shed light on the situation. Lily nodded. There was an urgency in Miss Marple's voice, one that Lily had come to recognise as a signal that they were on the brink of discovering something important. She didn't know what it was yet, but she could feel it, like a shadow lurking just beyond their reach. They left the cemetery and made their way back into the heart of Blythewood, heading toward the village tavern, where the older villagers often gathered for their afternoon tea. It was here that Miss Marple believed they might find someone who remembered Eliza Whittaker and could perhaps answer the questions that had been lingering for so long. Inside the tavern, the warm glow of the fire and the scent of tea filled the air. A handful of villagers sat at the tables, speaking in low voices, their conversations interrupted only by the occasional clink of a teacup or the soft murmur of the wind outside. At the far corner of the room sat a man who had lived in Blythewood nearly all his life, Mr. Samuel Westbrook. He was a quiet man, in his early 70s, with a weathered face and a slow, deliberate way of speaking. He had lived in the village long before Eliza Whittaker had come to it, and his memory was sharp when it came to the village's history. Mr. Westbrook, Miss Marple greeted him warmly as they approached his table. I hope we're not interrupting. We were hoping to ask you about Eliza Whittaker. The old man looked up from his tea, his eyes narrowing slightly at the mention of Eliza's name. He had always been one to keep his thoughts close to his chest, but there was a certain resignation in his gaze, as if he had long been waiting for someone to ask about the past. Ah, Eliza, Mr. Westbrook said with a sigh, placing his cup down carefully. A beauty she was. Came to this village when she was just a girl, no older than Lily here. She was close with Theodore, of course. They were inseparable for a time, but then, well, you know the story. She disappeared. Miss Marple sat down across from him, her gaze fixed on the man. But Mr. Westbrook, we've been told very little about Eliza's family. Wasn't she the daughter of someone in the village? Mr. Westbrook hesitated, his brow furrowing as though he was searching for the right words. Well, that's the thing, Miss Marple. Eliza didn't come from here. She came from the city, London, I think. Her family, well, they never came with her. No one ever really knew much about them. As for her leaving, well, there was talk that she ran away. But no one knew why. People thought she was heartbroken, that Theodore had turned his back on her. Lily felt a pang in her chest. The idea that Eliza might have been abandoned, by Theodore, by everyone, was difficult to bear. But something in Mr. Westbrook's words didn't sit right with her. If Eliza had run away, why had she never contacted anyone? Why had she not come back to the village? There's something else, isn't there? Miss Marple said quietly, her eyes narrowing. Something you're not telling us. Mr. Westbrook looked down at his cup, his hands trembling slightly. He seemed torn, as if battling with some long-buried guilt. Finally he looked up and met Miss Marple's gaze. There were rumours, he said, his voice lower now. Some said she had a child, an illegitimate child, but no one knew for sure. The child was never seen, never spoken of. But I think Eliza might have left because of it. She was never quite the same after that. She came to see me once, just before she left. She was in a terrible state and she said she couldn't stay here anymore, not with the way people were talking. Lily felt a sickening knot form in her stomach. Could Eliza have been carrying a secret so painful that she had chosen to disappear forever? Where did she go? Lily asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Westbrook shook his head. No one knew, and even if they did, no one ever spoke of it again. Miss Marple sat back in her chair, her mind clearly piecing together the fragments of information they had gathered. "I believe we are getting closer, Miss Harper," she said softly, her tone serious. "We may soon find out what happened to Eliza Whittaker, and perhaps why Theodore Gray never truly recovered from her disappearance." Lily looked at Miss Marple, her heart heavy with the weight of the mystery. They were no closer to knowing the whole truth, but with every step they were uncovering more of the past, one secret at a time, and she knew, as Miss Marple did, that the truth could not stay hidden forever. The afternoon sun had begun to pierce the fog, its golden rays casting a warm glow over the village of Blythewood. The sense of mystery that had hung over the estate and its secrets had not lifted, but something about the change in weather felt like a new beginning. Miss Marple's pace was as steady as ever, but Lily could feel the shift in her, a quiet resolve that suggested they were on the brink of uncovering the missing pieces of the puzzle. They'd spent the last few hours speaking with more villagers, gathering fragments of information about Eliza Whittaker and Theodore Gray. The pieces, though few, were beginning to come together. But there was one place left to look, one last person who might hold the key to the mystery of Eliza's disappearance and Mr. Gray's tortured years thereafter. Miss Marple had suggested they visit the local solicitor's office. It was a modest building tucked away behind a cluster of old cottages, its stone walls grey and unassuming. The solicitor, Mr. Harrison Vickers, was a man who had served the village for many years, but he was also someone who had dealt with the Gray family on several occasions, especially when it came to the estate. If anyone might know something significant about Mr. Gray's personal life, it would be him. Lily walked alongside Miss Marple as they made their way up to the front door, feeling an increasing sense of anticipation. The solicitor's office was quiet, a place that seemed to be unaffected by the outside world. The thick oak door creaked as they entered, and the scent of old paper and ink greeted them. Behind the desk sat Mr. Vickers, a thin man with glasses perched on the edge of his nose, his hair thinning at the temples. He looked up as they entered, a slow smile appearing on his lips. "Miss Marple," he said, rising to greet her with a respectful bow. "What a pleasure. How may I assist you today?" Miss Marple's smile was warm, but there was a steely glint in her eyes. "Good afternoon, Mr. Vickers. I trust you are well. I'm here to speak with you about Theodore Gray. As you know, he passed away recently, and I believe there are some matters we must discuss regarding his estate." Mr. Vickers nodded, his expression becoming more serious. "Yes, of course. Theodore was a client of mine for many years. His affairs were always in order, though I must admit, I was never quite sure about the nature of his personal life. He was a private man, but there were times he seemed to be in a great deal of distress. I always respected his wishes, though." Miss Marple did not waste time with pleasantries. "I'm aware that Theodore Gray had a significant relationship with a woman named Eliza Whittaker. She disappeared many years ago, but I believe she may have had an important connection to his life. Do you have any knowledge of her, or of any letters or documents Theodore may have kept regarding her?" At the mention of Eliza's name, Mr. Vickers stiffened slightly. His eyes flickered for a moment before he regained his composure. He looked down at the desk as though weighing whether or not to speak. "Eliza Whittaker," he began slowly. "Yes, I knew her by name, though not personally. She and Theodore were quite close for a time. But after her disappearance, Theodore became very withdrawn, even paranoid at times." "Do you have any records, Mr. Vickers?" Miss Marple pressed, her voice calm but insistent. "Any letters? Any legal documents that might reference her?" Mr. Vickers hesitated, clearly reluctant to open old wounds. "There are documents, yes, but I must caution you, Miss Marple. These are not things I would normally share. They are private, and some of them were never meant to be seen again. Still, if you believe they are necessary for your investigation, I will retrieve them." Lily felt a knot form in her stomach. What could be so private, so secret, that it had to be kept hidden away? The mystery surrounding Eliza Whittaker and Mr. Gray was becoming darker with every passing hour, and now, it seemed, they were about to uncover something that might change everything. "Please, Mr. Vickers," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle but firm. "We need to understand what happened to Eliza, and I believe these documents will help us do so." With a resigned sigh, Mr. Vickers rose from his chair and walked toward a filing cabinet in the back of the room. He rummaged through it for a moment, his fingers sifting through the papers, before pulling out a small, old-fashioned leather-bound folder. He placed it carefully on the desk in front of Miss Marple. "This is the last correspondence I have concerning Eliza Whittaker," Mr. Vickers said, his voice quieter now. "It's a letter Theodore wrote to her shortly before she disappeared. I never shared it with anyone, not even the police, because I felt it was personal." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes studying the letter intently. "Thank you, Mr. Vickers. We appreciate your cooperation." Lily's heart raced as Miss Marple carefully opened the letter. The paper was yellowed with age, the ink slightly faded but still legible. Miss Marple began to read aloud, her voice steady as she deciphered the words. "Eliza, I cannot live with this any longer. The truth must come out, and you must know what I have done. I cannot be the man you thought I was. I am not the one you loved. My sins have caught up with me, and I fear they will destroy us both. Please, do not come back to me. Leave, for your own safety, before it's too late." Miss Marple paused, her fingers gently tracing the words. "This letter," she said slowly. "It's a confession of sorts. Theodore is admitting to something he believed could harm Eliza, and yet he tells her to leave. He tells her to run away. But he never says what the truth is, what it was that he feared would destroy them both." Lily felt a chill creep down her spine. "Do you think he was involved in something criminal?" Miss Marple nodded, but her expression remained thoughtful. "I believe he was. Whatever Theodore Grey was hiding, it was something dark enough that he wanted Eliza to stay away, perhaps even to protect her. But the question remains, what truth could be so dangerous that it led to Eliza's disappearance?" Lily's mind was whirling. Every new piece of information seemed to raise even more questions. If Theodore had confessed something so terrible in this letter, why had he never told anyone? And why had Eliza vanished? Did she know the truth? Had she run away to escape from him? Or had something more sinister happened? As Miss Marple set the letter down, she looked at Lily with a sharpness in her eyes that made Lily feel as though the answer was right within their grasp. "I believe, Miss Harper," Miss Marple said softly, "that we are on the brink of uncovering not just Eliza's fate, but also the true nature of Theodore Grey's last words. He was trying to protect her, yes, but from what? The mystery was far from over, but with every step they were drawing closer to the truth, no matter how dark it might be." The weather had shifted by evening, the mist rolling back into the hills, leaving behind a clear sky. The air was crisp, with the faintest scent of pine carried on the breeze, but it couldn't quite clear the heaviness that had settled over Blythewood. Miss Marple and Lily stood in the quiet of the village square. The weight of the discoveries made that afternoon hanging like a shadow between them. The letter from Theodore Grey had revealed much, but it had also deepened the mystery. The words on the page, "I am not the one you loved. My sins have caught up with me," were a chilling confession of guilt, yet they offered no clarity as to what Theodore's sins had been, or how they had involved Eliza Whittaker. Lily could feel the weight of the puzzle pressing down on her, the pieces too scattered, too incomplete to form a clear picture. Theodore's last words to Eliza had been full of anguish, and yet they left far more questions than answers. And then there was the child, the baby in the photograph with Eliza. Was it Theodore's child? Was that the secret he had hidden all these years? The idea made Lily's stomach tighten, the mystery becoming more personal with each new revelation. Miss Marple's voice broke through her thoughts. "We must return to the Grey estate, Miss Harper. There's one last thing we need to examine, the study. It's time we looked more closely at the room where Theodore Grey spent the final hours of his life. The answers we seek are there, hidden in plain sight." Lily nodded, though a sense of unease clung to her. The Grey estate had already given up so many secrets, but something about the study felt like a final frontier, a place where the truth would either be uncovered or buried forever. They made their way to the estate as the sky deepened into twilight, the air growing colder with each passing minute. The estate stood silently in the fading light, its imposing silhouette casting long shadows across the grounds. Miss Marple led the way, her steps steady, her mind already working through the possibilities. Lily followed closely behind, her heart beating faster as they approached the entrance. The front door creaked as Miss Marple pushed it open, and they stepped inside. The air in the hallway was thick with dust, the scent of neglect hanging in the stale air. It had been days since anyone had entered the house, and the silence inside felt almost suffocating. "Let's head directly to the study," Miss Marple said, her voice low but firm. "There is something in that room we've yet to uncover." Lily felt a twinge of fear as they ascended the staircase, the familiar creaks of the old house beneath their feet. The study was at the end of the long corridor, its door slightly ajar as if it were waiting for them. Miss Marple pushed it open gently, and they stepped inside. The room had not changed since their last visit. The desk still stood at the centre, papers scattered across it, the brandy bottle still half full beside the chair where Theodore had been found. But there was something different about it now, a sense of expectation, as if the room itself were holding its breath, waiting for something to be discovered. Miss Marple crossed the room with purpose, her sharp eyes scanning every corner. She moved toward the desk, her fingers grazing over the papers that lay in disarray. Lily watched in silence, sensing that the final piece of the puzzle was within reach. "Miss Marple," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly, "what are we looking for?" Miss Marple didn't answer immediately. She was focused, her eyes moving over each document with a practiced precision. Finally, she stopped at a small drawer in the desk, one that had previously gone unnoticed. She opened it with a creak, revealing a small stack of letters, their edges yellowed with age. "These," Miss Marple said softly, lifting them carefully from the drawer, "are the key." Lily leaned in, her curiosity piqued. Miss Marple handed her one of the letters, its seal still intact. "These letters were written by Eliza Whittaker," Miss Marple explained, the last correspondence she had with Theodore Grey before she disappeared. Lily's breath caught in her throat as she unfolded the letter. The handwriting was elegant, the words flowing smoothly across the page. But as she began to read, the letter quickly revealed itself to be a confession that added layers to the mystery of Eliza's disappearance and the truth behind Theodore's actions. "Dearest Theodore, I cannot carry this burden any longer. The child is not mine alone, it is ours, yours, and mine. I had hoped to keep it a secret, but the time has come for you to know the truth. You are the father. I know you are angry and perhaps I deserve your anger, but I cannot bear to stay in this place, not with the way people look at me, not with the way you treat me. I will leave, Theodore, I must, but know this, I will never forget you, or what we shared." Lily's hands shook as she read the final words. The child is ours. The letter confirmed everything Lily had feared. The child in the photograph had been Theodore's, and Eliza had left, not just to escape the whispers of the village, but to protect the secret they had shared. But why had she left so suddenly? And why had she never returned to claim the child? What had driven her to disappear, leaving only a trail of unanswered questions? Miss Marple watched Lily closely, her expression unreadable. "This letter changes everything, Miss Harper. Eliza's disappearance was not the result of some tragic misunderstanding. She left because she was carrying a heavy secret, one that she couldn't bear to share with anyone. And I believe Theodore in his final days knew the truth. He knew the child was his, and he knew he had failed her. The guilt, the fear, the love, they consumed him." Lily's mind spun with the implications of what she had just read. Eliza had left the village because of the child, their child. But what had happened to her after she left? Was she still alive? And why had Theodore never spoken of the child? Miss Marple seemed to sense Lily's growing confusion. "Theodore Grey's death was not the end of this story, Miss Harper. It was merely a chapter in a much larger narrative, one that stretches back further than anyone knew." Lily nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of the mystery. "So what now? What do we do with this information?" Miss Marple turned away from the desk, her eyes glinting with the sharpness of someone who had seen it all before. "We find out what happened to Eliza Whittaker, and we discover the true reason she left. Because, my dear, I believe we're not just looking for a missing woman. We are looking for a woman who disappeared to protect something far more precious than herself. The pieces were falling into place, and yet the truth still eluded them. What had happened to Eliza? What had Theodore done to make her run, and why had she never returned?" The final answer was within reach, but it was still hidden in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. The room seemed to grow colder, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for them to uncover the last piece of the puzzle. And Lily knew, as Miss Marple did, that the truth would come with a price, one that neither of them could yet fully comprehend. But there was no turning back now. The mystery was almost over, and the answers were just within their grasp. The following days felt like a slow unravelling. The more they discovered, the more it seemed the pieces were not just about Theodore Grey and Eliza Whittaker, they were about Blythewood itself. The village, with its cobblestone streets and charming facades, hid secrets beneath its placid surface, secrets that were bound to resurface as Miss Marple and Lily pressed on with their investigation. Lily had returned to the Grey estate with Miss Marple that afternoon, the weight of their discoveries still fresh in her mind. They had learned of Eliza's confession, the letter revealing the child that had been kept secret for so long. They had learned that Theodore had carried the burden of his guilt, but there was still so much more to understand. Most importantly, what had happened to Eliza after she left Blythewood. Miss Marple had been quiet for most of the day, her sharp mind piecing together the final threads of the mystery. They had spoken to villagers, gone through documents, and now they were standing in front of the Grey estate again, at the threshold of the study, the room where everything had changed for Theodore. "You're thinking about it, aren't you, Miss Marple?" Lily said quietly as they approached the door. "The child, the letter, it all connects. But there's something we're still missing." Miss Marple stopped before the door, her eyes gleaming with quiet certainty. "Yes, Miss Harper, we're close, closer than we've ever been. But I believe the final piece of this mystery lies in Theodore Grey's final days. We've learned that Eliza left to protect the child, our mystery child, but that doesn't explain why she vanished without a trace, or why Theodore died with such desperate words." They entered the study once more, the air thick with the history of everything that had happened within its walls. Lily's eyes fell on the desk where they had found the letter. The place seemed unchanged, but it no longer felt like a room that had held a solitary, reclusive man. It now felt like a place of broken promises, half-told stories, and unspoken regrets. Miss Marple walked over to the bookshelf, running her fingers along the spines of the books. She stopped at a particular volume and pulled it from the shelf. "This," she said, "may be the key to understanding the rest of Theodore's story." The book was old, bound in worn leather. Its title, faintly embossed on the cover, read The Grey Legacy. Lily raised an eyebrow. "What is this?" "It is a family history, Miss Harper," Miss Marple replied, her voice low. "One that Theodore himself compiled. A history of the Grey family, but also something more." She opened the book to the first few pages, where the names of Theodore's ancestors were listed. As Lily leaned in closer, Miss Marple continued to flip through the pages, her fingers stopping at a certain section. She handed the book to Lily, pointing to a specific entry. "This," Miss Marple said quietly, "is the piece that has been hidden for years." Lily scanned the text. It described the lineage of the Grey family, their wealth, their connections, and buried deep within the family's records a single name, Eliza Whittaker. But it wasn't just Eliza's name that shocked Lily. It was the details listed beneath it. Eliza was not just any woman Theodore had loved. She was connected to the Grey family in a far deeper way. "Look here," Miss Marple murmured. "Theodore's family, the Greys, were not just wealthy landowners, they were involved in local politics and business. Eliza Whittaker was not just a young woman from London. She was the niece of a powerful businessman, someone who had dealings with the Grey family decades ago. And there's something even more telling." Miss Marple pointed to the next line. "Eliza's father, it seems, was once married to Theodore Grey's own sister." Lily's breath caught. Eliza was his niece, and her father was married to his sister. Yes, Miss Harper, that means Eliza was not only a lover of Theodore's, she was also family through his sister's marriage. Miss Marple's voice took on a darker tone. This explains why Theodore's guilt was so consuming. It wasn't just a case of losing a lover. It was the loss of family, the betrayal of family bonds. Lily blinked in shock, trying to absorb the magnitude of what Miss Marple had revealed. Eliza had been more than just a romantic partner to Theodore. She had been entwined with his family in a way he could never have publicly acknowledged. And when she disappeared, it wasn't just the loss of love. It was the loss of a family member, a connection that should have been kept secret. But why did Eliza leave? Why was she forced to disappear? Lily asked, her mind racing. That Miss Marple said softly, is the final piece of the puzzle. Theodore's sister, Eliza's aunt, had an affair, one that led to the dissolution of her marriage. It was whispered that Theodore's father had been involved in shady dealings, and the affair led to public scandal. Eliza's mother, seeking to protect her daughter from the shame, demanded that Theodore break ties with her. The family wanted to preserve their reputation, no matter the cost. Lily felt a sinking sensation in her stomach. Eliza had not just left because of love, it was because of family pressure. Her very existence had been overshadowed by the sins of others. Theodore was caught between two worlds, Miss Marple continued. He loved Eliza, but he was bound by duty to his family. That's why, when the truth about the child came to light, he wanted to protect them both, from the scandal, from the gossip, from the destructive weight of the past. That is why he sent her away. Lily nodded slowly, her thoughts in turmoil. The Grey family had been a place of secrets and lies for so long, and Theodore had borne the weight of those secrets in his heart. But where did Eliza go after she left? Why had she never returned? I believe, Miss Marple said, her eyes sharp, that the answer lies in a letter I have yet to show you. Lily looked up, startled. Another letter? Miss Marple nodded, reaching into her bag and pulling out a small envelope. The paper was yellowed and fragile, the seal broken. This was found among Theodore's papers, hidden away in a drawer. It was addressed to Eliza, but it was never sent. In it, Theodore reveals more than just his regret. He reveals his final decision. Lily took the letter, her hands trembling. She carefully opened it, reading aloud the words inside. My dearest Eliza, I cannot bear to see you leave. The truth has destroyed us both, and I fear it will destroy the future as well. But know this, I will never forget you, nor the child you carry. My decisions were made to protect you, but I have failed you both. I cannot live with the consequences. If you are reading this, then you must know, my heart is with you, always. But if you choose to leave, I will respect it. I will let you go, but the child will always be mine. Promise me you will protect them from the world, from the harm I've caused. I will leave everything for you both, and I will find a way to make things right. Lily's voice faltered as she finished the letter. She felt as if the ground beneath her was shifting. Theodore Grey had confessed everything in his final words, but even in his deepest guilt, he had left Eliza with one final burden: to protect the child, to shield them from the family secrets that had defined his life. Miss Marple's voice broke the silence. Eliza Whittaker did not leave out of shame, Miss Harper. She left to protect the child, Theodore's child, and Theodore's final act was to protect them both, even at the cost of his own soul. Lily looked at Miss Marple, her heart heavy with the weight of what had been revealed. They had uncovered the truth, not just of Eliza's disappearance, but of a life intertwined with deception, regret, and love. But the final question remained: what had happened to Eliza? Where had she gone after she left Blythewood? And perhaps most importantly, was the child still alive? The room in the Grey estate had grown dim with the setting sun, the shadows stretching long across the floor as if the very walls of the house were trying to conceal the secrets they held. Miss Marple and Lily sat in quiet contemplation, the weight of their discoveries pressing heavily on their shoulders. The mystery that had once seemed so distant was now so close, they could almost feel the truth in their fingertips. But there was one final question that remained unanswered: the fate of Eliza Whittaker and the child she had carried. Lily stared out the window, her thoughts swirling. She could hear the soft rustling of leaves in the breeze, but it couldn't quiet the turmoil in her mind. What had happened to Eliza? Had she really disappeared into the ether, as the village claimed? Or had she been forced into hiding, her life a constant battle to protect the child from a world that had never accepted them? Miss Marple, always the steady presence, sat opposite her, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You are thinking about Eliza, aren't you, Miss Harper?" she said softly, her voice steady but with a hint of compassion. Lily nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, I don't understand. She couldn't have just disappeared like that. She must have had a plan, a reason for leaving, but why didn't she ever return? Why didn't she contact anyone?" Miss Marple remained silent for a moment, her mind working through the pieces of the puzzle, Then she spoke with quiet certainty. "I believe Eliza left, not because she wanted to run away, but because she had no other choice. She knew that Theodore's family would stop at nothing to keep the truth from coming out, and she, like him, was caught in a web of deception and guilt. But I suspect there is more to her story than even she realized." Lily looked at her, confusion written across her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Miss Marple said, her voice growing quieter, "that Eliza may have had a plan all along, a plan to protect the child from the very family who tried to bury their existence. And I believe she left a trail that we may yet find." Lily's heart raced. "You think she left a trail?" Miss Marple nodded, a slight smile forming on her lips. "Yes, my dear. I believe Eliza did not vanish into thin air. She went into hiding, but she left a message, a final clue perhaps, for those who would come after her. And I believe that message is in the one place we have yet to look, the church." Lily blinked in surprise. "The church?" "Yes," Miss Marple said, standing up. "The church was a place of refuge for many in Blythewood, even for those who had nowhere else to turn. It's possible that Eliza, knowing the risks she faced, went there in her final days before she left. She may have left something behind, something that will finally explain where she went and why." Lily stood as well, a surge of hope rising in her chest. "Let's go to the church then. We have to find out the truth." The two women made their way quickly to St. Mary's Church, the ancient structure standing at the heart of the village. The church was old, its stone walls weathered by time, but it still carried an air of solemnity and quiet reverence. Inside, the pews were empty, save for a few scattered candles flickering in the dim light. The soft echo of their footsteps seemed louder in the silence. Miss Marple led the way to the vestry, her mind clearly focused on a single goal. Lily followed, her pulse quickening with anticipation. The vestry was a small, quiet room at the back of the church, filled with old books, papers, and various relics of the past. There was a single wooden desk in the centre, papers scattered on top of it, most of them yellowed with age. Miss Marple's eyes darted across the room, her fingers brushing the edges of the papers. She moved to a small cabinet in the corner, pulling open the drawers one by one. Finally, she stopped, her eyes narrowing as she pulled out a small worn notebook. Lily's breath caught in her throat. "Is that—" Miss Marple nodded. "This, my dear, is exactly what I was hoping to find." The notebook was a small leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed but still intact. Miss Marple opened it carefully and Lily leaned in, her eyes scanning the delicate handwriting. It was Eliza's handwriting, there was no mistaking it. The words were clear, but there was an urgency to them, a sense of finality. "To those who find this, if you are reading these words, then I have gone. I have left Blythewood, not because I wanted to, but because I had no other choice. Theodore's family would never allow us to live in peace. They would have taken the child from me, just as they took him from me. I cannot allow that. The child is mine, but it is also Theodore's. I do not know what the future holds for him, but I know this. I must keep him safe from the world that would destroy him. I have left Blythewood, but I will never forget what we shared, and I will always protect the child no matter the cost. Please understand, I am doing this for him, for our son. May he grow up knowing the truth, even if I cannot be there to tell it to him myself." Lily's heart raced as she absorbed the words. There it was, the confirmation she had been waiting for. Eliza had not just left to escape. She had left to protect their son, Theodore's son. The child they had shared was alive. And Eliza had gone into hiding to shield him from the very people who had tried to tear their family apart. "But where did she go?" Lily asked, her voice trembling with emotion. Miss Marple scanned the pages, her eyes searching for more. There was one more entry, written in a hurried scrawl. "I leave for a place far from here, where they will never find us. The child will be safe. Theodore, I forgive you for everything. I hope that one day, when the world is kinder, we can be reunited." Miss Marple closed the notebook slowly, her face unreadable. She didn't say where she was going, but she made it clear that she left to keep the child safe. She knew the dangers he would face if Theodore's family found him. Lily's mind spun with the realization. Eliza had hidden the child. Somewhere safe, far away from Blythewood. She had protected him, just as she had promised. But where could she have gone? Miss Marple placed the journal gently on the desk, her eyes thoughtful. I believe Eliza left for a place where she could disappear without a trace. She didn't want to risk anyone finding her or the child. But I also believe that this is not the end of the story." Lily looked up, her eyes wide. "You think there's more?" "I do," Miss Marple said quietly. "I think that one day, the child, perhaps a grown man now, will return to Blythewood. And when he does, the truth of Eliza and Theodore Grey will come with him. But for now, we can only wait." The mystery of Eliza Whittaker, Theodore Grey, and their child was not yet fully resolved, but they had uncovered the most important piece of the puzzle. The child was alive, and Eliza had done everything in her power to ensure his safety, even at the cost of her own life. The story, Miss Marple knew, was far from over. But for now, the truth was clear. Eliza had made her choice, and in doing so, had ensured that the legacy of her love and the secret of her son would one day be revealed. And that was enough. The village of Blythewood, now bathed in the soft golden light of an autumn evening, felt a little less still, a little less secretive. The mysteries that had long shrouded the lives of Theodore Grey, Eliza Whittaker, and the child they had both protected had been uncovered, at least in part. But there were still questions left unanswered, gaps in the story that Miss Marple knew would someday need to be filled. The truth had a way of finding its way to the surface, whether people were ready for it or not. Miss Marple and Lily stood in the garden of the Grey estate, the old house looming behind them like a memory. They had spent days combing through Theodore's papers, talking to the few remaining villagers who could remember Eliza, and piecing together the fragments of a life that had been buried in secrecy. They had found the notebook, Eliza's final words, and the knowledge that the child, Theodore's son, was alive and protected, though hidden away for reasons only Eliza fully understood. But what now? What did all of this mean for Blythewood? What did it mean for the future of the child who had been born out of love, and yet hidden away because of the sins of others? Lily stood by Miss Marple's side, her thoughts a whirl of emotions. The mystery had started as a simple curiosity, an old man's death, a strange confession, a whispered name. But it had grown into something more, a story of love, guilt, sacrifice, and a family bound by secrets. The weight of the journey they had taken together felt like a heavy cloak on Lily's shoulders. "Do you think we will ever know where Eliza went, Miss Marple?" Lily asked softly, her gaze distant as if searching for something beyond the horizon. "Do you think the child will ever return to Blythewood?" Miss Marple stood silently for a moment, her eyes scanning the estate, her mind turning over the events of the past weeks. "I believe that, one day, the child will return, when he is old enough to understand the truth. Eliza went to great lengths to protect him, not just from the world, but from the very family that could never accept him. And in doing so, she ensured that he could live a life free of the shadows of the past. But will he come back here? Will he want to?" Lily asked, her voice tinged with doubt. "The boy, or man, I believe he will return to Blythewood someday," Miss Marple replied thoughtfully. "It is in his blood, after all. And perhaps, when the time is right, the truth will no longer be a burden. The world will be kinder, more understanding of the love between Theodore and Eliza, and of the child who was born of it, but only time will tell." The wind shifted slightly, the leaves rustling as though the earth itself were whispering its agreement. Blythewood, though steeped in history and secrecy, seemed to be waking from its long slumber. The village, with its quiet streets and peaceful facade, had always known more than it let on. Now the secrets of the past were being brought into the light. Miss Marple turned to Lily, her gaze softening. "You've been invaluable in this investigation, Miss Harper. Your sharp eye and keen sense of intuition have been the key to uncovering the truth. I have no doubt that you will continue to unravel mysteries as you grow older." Lily smiled, though there was still a sadness in her heart. The mystery was over, but the loss felt like a part of her would always remain with it. The truth of Eliza's sacrifice, Theodore's guilt, and the child's hidden existence would stay with her, even as life in Blythewood returned to its quiet rhythm. "I just wish I could have known more," Lily said softly, "about the child, about what happened after Eliza left. I just wish I could see them, know they're safe." Miss Marple placed a gentle hand on Lily's shoulder. "You will one day. Just remember that sometimes the greatest mysteries are the ones that take time to reveal themselves. The truth has a way of coming to light, even when we least expect it. The air felt different now, lighter somehow, as if the village itself were breathing a sigh of relief. The years of silence and unspoken words had finally been broken. But there was a sense of closure too, a feeling that the story of Eliza and Theodore, and of the child, was finally reaching its end. And yet, in some small way, it felt like the beginning of something else. Something that was just beyond reach, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Miss Marple and Lily left the grey estate together, their footsteps echoing softly in the quiet street. The village seemed to embrace them as they passed, its stone walls and winding paths now holding fewer secrets than before. But there would always be more mysteries to uncover, more lives to understand, more stories to tell. As the sun set over Blythewood, casting its warm golden light over the village, Lily couldn't help but feel a sense of peace. The past was no longer a shadow looming over the present. It had been faced, acknowledged, and in some small way set free. And though the mystery of Eliza and the child had no simple conclusion, it was a story that would live on in the hearts of those who had uncovered it. Miss Marple glanced at Lily one last time before they turned a corner, her eyes twinkling with that familiar, knowing look. "You did well, Miss Harper. Perhaps in time, you'll be the one to solve the next mystery that finds its way to Blythewood." Lily smiled, feeling a surge of hope. She knew that no matter where life took her, the lessons Miss Marple had taught her would stay with her. The world was full of mysteries waiting to be solved, and she was ready to face them, one step at a time. And so, with the secrets of the past finally laid to rest, the story of Blythewood came to an end, at least for now. But the legacy of love, sacrifice, and the quest for truth would remain, echoing in the hearts of all who had lived it. And in the end, it was the truth, however painful or bittersweet, that had set them all free.